Hello, everybody. In today's issue refinement session, we are going to specifically look at this issue in front of us, where we're trying to define the UX and technical requirements for our WYSIWYG editor. So for a little bit of context, we are considering or reconsidering our requirements from the editor side. We did this exercise a few months ago when we started working on the product. But as our kind of like direction evolved and as our knowledge of the technical space became more clear, we realized we might need to define different requirements, specifically around some of the challenges that we've had to date, trying to customize the Toast UI editor that we're currently using, customizing its behavior. So we want to as part of our process of evaluating, is Toast UI editor the right solution for us, or what is the right solution? We want to start by making sure we have our requirements clearly defined and let the requirements guide our decision making rather than opinion. So in today's session, Enrique and I are going to go through the initial kind of like requirements we had here, as well as all the feedback and discussion on this issue. And the goal where we want to end up is that we want to finalize these requirements and be able to move forward where we move on to the next step where we want to then research and evaluate the editor options against these technical requirements. So essentially success today looks like populating the requirements in this issue, everything that's here. All right, Enrique, you've spent quite a bit of time going through, thinking about these things. Is there any kind of like high-level remarks you want to make before we get into the nitty-gritty of, looking at each of these requirements and maybe just creating a definition or example of what we mean by them?
Yes. I can focus on the technical requirements. Probably you have a better understanding of the behavioral ones and what we want to achieve in the future. But I will focus my comment on what we learned in the past 4 or 5 months developing the features that we so far delivered in the server-side editor. So what we started implementing this editor, first, knowing that we are creating an editor to edit pages for a static site engine that are created using Markdown as a main syntax to format those documents. What we learned while working on this is that usually these pages in static site engines do not rely only on Markdown to generate content. For example, in the case of the handbook that uses Middleman as a static site engine, we are using a templating engine that is ERB, that is using Ruby syntax within Markdown, and we use that to generate dynamic content. If we go to other static site engines like Hugo or Gatsby or Nox, they will have their own templated syntaxes. In the case of Gatsby, it goes beyond that. It doesn't only have a template syntax. You can write React within. So we need to find a way of displaying that information in the WYSIWYG editor in a correct way. Perhaps if we want to provide some advanced functionality, we want to interpret those template syntax and display something that the user can edit, or perhaps one of the common cases in the handbook is including a partial within a page. So maybe we want to take that partial and display it in the WYSIWYG editor because we are loading that. So that's the main impediment that we are having right now with Toast UI. So Toast UI is a great editor because it provides the full stack that we need to display a Markdown document and use it. It takes the Markdown document, it has a Markdown parser, and it converts that Markdown to HTML. So it basically renders the Markdown. And then that HTML is, the user can edit it in a WYSIWYG editor. And then it converts that HTML back to Markdown. The problem with those UI, the limitation is that they implemented the Markdown parser to interpret the common mark specification. But usually those static site engines, as I mentioned before, have other syntaxes that we have to process as well. And we cannot extend the parser that those UI uses. So the idea is that we need an editor, or not necessarily an editor, but we need to find pieces that allows us that sort of extensibility. Like we actually need a Markdown parser that is the foundation that will help us to process and render that Markdown. But we also need the modularity to implement extensions for that parser.
So in summary, I think one of the things that I also would highlight is that while our initial focus is specifically on Markdown, you know, like we could end up where we want to allow somebody to edit an HTML page in WYSIWYG mode. And so it feels to me like what we really want to do is decouple our WYSIWYG kind of like rendering from the source, and not say, okay, we have a solution that is specific to Markdown WYSIWYG editing, which Toast UI does. You know, it's very good for its specific use case, but I think our use case, and specifically, as you mentioned, you know, the fact that we have partials and dynamic code embedded in templates makes it a little bit more complicated than just saying, hey, we're only working with Markdown, you know, because essentially we're working with lots of different syntax. And so, you know, we almost want to have that separation between parsers that parse the syntax into an AST and the renderer that takes the AST and renders that. Is that a correct summary?
That is a correct summary. And as an example, one of the architectures that I think describes that very well is the one of the CK editor. That is one that we've been evaluating. So they have this concept of data transformer. So first, they have like this language to define rich content that is not Markdown, that is not HTML. It's like an abstraction of all of those languages. And then they define this protocol where you take either Markdown or HTML, and they convert those languages to this common rich content language. So that's the kind of decoupling that we need.
So they've almost got like a interim kind of like definition language that they have between the various kind of like syntaxes and stuff they support and their renderer.
That's right. They have this layer of abstraction, and it's the same idea that I saw in the JS library. They have this language that is not coupled to HTML. It's just like you have to convert a format that those editors support.
Okay. All right. I think that gives us some good kind of like background and context again, and just recapping our discussion and where we're at. I think what I want to do is essentially, because I'm going to start sharing my screen again. Essentially, what we want to do is we want to come up with a bunch of evaluation criteria, essentially, that we want to be able to reference as part of our decision-making process. Now, this isn't a kind of like all, you know, you have to, you know, whatever we do needs to check all the boxes, but essentially we at least want to evaluate whatever proposals we come up with against these criteria and see how they stack up to it. So what I'm suggesting we do is we take some of our requirements and we provide a definition. What is, for instance, what does maturity mean? And then what we can do is we can define some evaluation criteria to say, this is what how we look for maturity in whatever solution we're kind of like looking at. For instance, maturity could be the duration of the project. It could be the making sure that it's not in a beta release, or is it at least at a 1.0 release, or if it's not, is there any API breaking changes in planned? So I think maturity is probably close to stability as well. We don't necessarily want to use libraries and tools that are still in the process of being defined and whose API could change at any moment in time. So would you agree with that kind of like definition?
Yes, definitely. Besides that, well, probably this is related with community. But sometimes I've seen projects that are very mature, but then they stop getting new updates. So we should be careful about that. Yeah,
and I think we originally had community as a specific entity which we can cover as well. So let me just break this. So from a maturity, is how mature is the editor in terms of feature completion, i.e. stable API, and duration existence. Has it been used and proven over a period of time? Essentially what we're meaning there is we need to be wary. It doesn't mean it excludes a project, but we need to be wary of something that's like 3 months old that hasn't been used in projects. Also, I would say is hasn't been used in big projects. Looking at who uses the library is another indicator of maturity, I think. So how mature is the so what we can, let me just take this column and wrap it. And so I'll copy this into a table into the issue when we're done, but for just quick editing, let me actually share this so that you can collaborate if you want to. Let's change this to GitLab. Editor. Send you a link quickly.
Okay, I'll open it.
Right. So in terms of evaluation criteria, so what we want to look at is who uses who or what type of projects are using it. We want to look at release, let's call it release version, looking for API stability. We want to look at feature completion as well, in the sense of if something is say at a 0.5 and it's a known roadmap that that there's a whole bunch of features that they're still planning, it obviously means that's not a negative thing necessarily, but it means it is an indicator of the level of maturity of the library or whatever tool it is. Feature completeness.
An example of that is that while testing 8 or JS, I noticed that they don't support nested lists. That's very,
wow.
very basic. Yeah, it doesn't have support for that.
That would be that would be a big challenge for us, because we definitely have lots of nested lists in our handbook, and we'd have to create that functionality ourselves then. All right, I think that's, I mean, we can expand on these criteria, but I think that gives a good indication of when we're looking at the library, what do we need to evaluate? Anything you think is obviously missing there?
No.
Okay. So community is, we want to ensure that the project is not only worked on by one or two developers, but that there is I want to call it a healthy, that there is healthy activity from the community. And the reason I'm saying healthy activity, because I'm seeing community and be more than just writing code, you know, reporting bugs, helping with documentation, stuff like that. I think we mustn't just be blinded by the fact that
a project has like 5,000 stars, right?
Yeah. So I think healthy activity from the community. So so yeah. Essentially, we want to avoid a middleman situation, you know, where the project is maintained by mainly one person, as far as I can see, and it's not actively being, you know, not a lot of people have access to drive it forward. So I think seeing, okay, so here we can come to the criteria. So what I always look for is how many issues have responses on them. How
quickly they respond as well.
Yeah, how many have responses and rate of response. Also, how many stale peers or MRs there are, because that for me is one of the worst things, is when there's a whole bunch of merge requests or pull requests and but it's not being actioned, or at least, even if it's not being merged in, that there's at least discussion about why it's not happening. We still peers there are. So stale meaning date or how old, and lack of activity, lack of comments. Let's call it comments.
Another criteria could be if the project has a sponsorship. Usually, for example, one of the projects that that I've been looking at, that is the Unified Collective. They have a sponsorship from Netlify, from Gatsby, and they are, you know, sponsoring economically, but also providing resources for development. They have engineers working on those projects, and that's usually a very good sign.
Okay, so it could be commercial or corporate sponsorship, or even something like a Patreon, or I think GitHub allows you to donate directly to projects, some projects as well now, and so on. So some sort of sponsorship. You know, I think the one thing that I always so in my days working on Ember, the one thing I really appreciate about the Ember community is the RFC process. So they were very open about changes that they were going to make, but also getting feedback from the community and addressing that. And I think open to community input is the thing that I'd like to put here. So it's one thing to have a community, but if you're not going to listen to them, you know, that's a kind of like a challenge.
Yeah, that's like an open close model, where you make the decisions in the shadows, and then you just release the code as open source. Usually, strong projects has a governance model, and they are very transparent about how the decision making happens.
The other thing I really hate that I'm adding it to maturity now is a lack of a release changelog. I cannot cope with a project that doesn't have that, because it makes it so difficult to know when you can easily upgrade or anything. And it's a sign for me of overall maturity and completeness. And the same thing with having a test suite, like you want to see those kind of things in a project. All right, let's not dwell too much on community further. We can always expand. So license is definitely important. So and this is more of a hygiene thing that we just have to comply with. And so the project must have an appropriate open source license for us to be able to embed it in our product. Evaluation criteria is check license, compatibility. Come on, Google, spell it for me. Compatibility. I think it's no, that doesn't feel right. Compatibility.
Yeah,
that looks better.
Not that one.
All right. I don't really think we need to dwell further on license. I mean, it's more of a binary thing there. Okay, browser support. So this is one that is definitely, it's a bit of a weird one in that browser support, especially if we're going to construct our solution from different projects, that it's not like a Toast UI, or if we look at CK editor, for instance, as a whole, it has browser support that it does. So it depends on whether we're doing, but I think it's still good to document our requirements from a browser. So our editor use case requires us to support not only desktop browsers, but tablets and mobile form factors as well.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think from a mobile browsers to consider support is so it'll be Pro Mobile, Firefox Mobile,
and iOS.
Safari, yes, Safari Mobile, and also Samsung, the Samsung Internet. That's a weird name for a browser, but this one is very big in the Samsung phones is very big in other areas of the world. I know Apple probably dominates the US market, but and they've started bundling their own browser, and I've seen it climb up. And I think it's even featured in the Can I Use stats.
What is the engine used by that browser?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I think it's a WebKit fork, but I'm not sure. Let's have a look quickly. Samsung Internet Browser Engine. Let's see. Advertising. History support. It's Chromium.
Oh, so it's just like supporting Chrome as well.
Yeah, so I think we don't have to specify it. And if they're bundling it, it's basically a packaged Chromium, so that's fine. So let's take that off. I think the only two that, I mean, Blink has, I think, diverged far enough from WebKit for us to say Safari and Chrome are separate, and Firefox still has their own rendering engine as well. Okay.
That's right.
So evaluation criterion and then obviously I think on desktop it would kind of like be I mean it's essentially Chromium.
I guess we could use the same criteria that GitLab uses, right?
Yeah.
That is like the last two versions of modern browsers. We do not support Internet Explorer anymore.
Yeah. So it's the last two versions of modern browsers. No, all right. Okay, so in terms of evaluation criteria is, I think the primary one is it must work on mobile. That I think is, like if it works on mobile, it's likely going to work on desktop as well. So, but I think, obviously it must work on our supported browsers. But I mean, in terms of the key things, because I think it comes back to our discussion of, what was it, Monaco, that doesn't work on mobile and doesn't have, any plans to support mobile right now. So I think whatever solution we come up with, proposal must be able to work on mobile. All right. Then mobile support, we've talked about that, on the browser support. I don't think we need to do a separate one for it. Skinning, I think that was more when we were still specifically thinking about, well, I mean, themability is important. So regardless of what, let's call it customization, I guess is the, so.
Yeah, that's a very broad.
Yeah, this is probably a little bit too broad, because under customization, you really have themability and extensibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that
So
themability is a good term because
yeah.
we are talking about changing probably the icons of the UI, or the overall visual appearance of the WYSIWYG editor.
All right, so the ability to change the UI to match the GitLab design system specifications, and extensibility, the ability to extend the functionality of the without the need for, I don't want to call it hacks, but well, that's, you almost want to have a defined API interface, but the ability to extend the functionality without the need for elaborate workarounds. Or
even another way of saying it is a stable protocol that the library provides to implement plugins or new modules.
Yes, yeah, you want the plugin or whatever needs to be architected to be extensible. Like you're looking for that architecture of them creating a modular structure, the ability to extend the function without the need for elaborate workarounds or code customization. So here, I think what we really want is cleanly, from a UI point of view, you want clear separation of the style and functionality. You don't want style to be dictated by functionality or functionality by style. So you almost, I hope I'm expressing myself right in what I'm saying. Clear separation between presentation and functionality. Does that make sense as a evaluation criteria?
Yeah, I'm gonna add that. How do I add another bullet point here?
Oh, go into the field, enter on it, and then you go option enter to go to a new line, and then option 8 gives you a bullet.
Ah, okay. Let me see, option. Well, that didn't work for me.
Oh,
okay.
let me see.
Just going to copy that bullet and paste it here.
Okay.
Probably could be I'm struggling very much with this. Trying to type here. When I type after the bullet, it goes to the same line, so that's a bit confusing.
Oh, so that's fine. Just type it in there. I'll clean it up.
Okay. So I'm adding the concept of a teaming framework because it's pretty much exactly what you say. But usually when a WYSIWYG editor has a team framework, it means that they structure the CSS
Yes.
with with a focus in mind of being upgradable. That's usually very it's like the best expression of that criteria.
Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree with what you're saying there. I'm thinking back on WYSIWYG editors in the past that I've used, and you could literally provide a new CSS file with your theme values, and it would kind of like cleanly apply it to the editor. All right, so the next one around extensibility. So what I've got here is architectured with extensibility in mind, a well-documented API. And I think maybe this architecture with extensibility in mind is a little bit vague. Maybe, I mean, the things that I look out for normally are, is there sufficient, I've lost Enrique. I hope he joins again. But the things that I look for are extensibility in mind, thinking of events, etc.
Sorry, I lost the connection for a moment.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just saying the sentence architecture with extensibility in mind is fairly generic. But what I'm thinking about there is I normally look for does this plugin have sufficient events for me to bind into, or is there proper functions to are there plugins like does it support doesn't have like a plugin ecosystem?
Yes, and that's this is another criteria that is like intermixed with community, because first we want to see that the community is implementing plugins on their own. Like there is an environment with many plugins that are community developed. And well,
yeah, I'm actually want to add now. Let me stop community authored plugins. Yeah, you want to see the community creating extensions, essentially, which is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and adding to the extensibility criteria. First, we need two levels of extensibility. So we are rendering Markdown, so we need extensibility in the Markdown renderer. But we are also providing custom editing tools for the content that we're rendering. For example, maybe we are rendering a partial. We want to render it in a very specific way in the WYSIWYG editor. I want that partial maybe to not be editable, or the user will interact with that in a very specific way. So we need that also the WYSIWYG editor to be extensible, not only the Markdown parser.
Yeah. Well done. Is there anything you would add in here in terms of like a bullet point to evaluate all of these components that we look at from an extensibility point of view?
Yes, I think that I'm gonna be specific about that.
Okay.
I'm gonna just add what I just said, because
Okay, cool.
should allow. I think that's those points are very. It's very important to be concrete about those 2 points, because that's our biggest pain point right now.
I'm wondering, we should almost add that to our definition as well. Like that's part of the definition of what we mean by extensibility. I think in terms of the evaluation criteria, I'm like, because I'm thinking maybe because we're probably going to have a whole suite of tools we use to create this ecosystem of functionality that we need, and we want to run these evaluation criteria on all of them. But in terms of what we like our definition of extensibility is that we want the parser we use to process and render Markdown should be extensible, and so it speaks to those 2 components there. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Okay. From a technology point of view, it needs to be compatible with our current tech stack. So obviously it either needs then to be vanilla JavaScript or Vue.js, and we don't want to have a dependency on jQuery. Anything else you can think of there? I think font awesome is obviously something we're moving away from as well, but I think if it is themable, it would probably allow us not to use font awesome. So I think that check there covers us.
That's right. I think that as long as it is, if we can use it in vanilla JS, we probably can use it in Vue.js as well. Of course, we don't want any old or legacy technology to be used in those libraries.
Yeah, I just added to the themability the use of SVGs instead of image sprites. I remember the old days, people using image sprites and stuff. Those were fun days. Just give me 1 second. I've got noisy dogs here.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay. We've covered all the initial technical criteria. I just want to check if there's anything that you've added here from a technical point of view that we should consider. I think this is more functionality behavior stuff. I mean, block-based editors behavior. The stuff you wrote here, Enrique, did we cover that in our points already?
Yes, we did.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, I think we've covered all the technical kind of like aspects. Let's move on to the user experience stuff. So let's just kind of like add a category here. Oops, what happened here? So this is technical. UX. I think Now, this is where we obviously can get, the risk here is trying to be too specific, but I think because, and also the risk is that defining something from a feature or behavior point of view, that just because it's not there doesn't mean we can't build it. So I'm wondering what best way it is to, essentially in our framework of providing evaluation criteria, how best to define that. I think it's more a case of making sure it doesn't restrict our desired behavior, rather than it doesn't. Say for instance we use an editor that doesn't support kind of like markdown shortcuts. So the ability to type markdown code and have it converted into the WYSIWYG version as you go to the next line. That's not a deal breaker in terms of whatever editor we use doesn't have it, because we can, but we want to make sure that it doesn't prohibit us from doing that. So I think so it's good to state it in the negative sense, in a way that we want to make sure that it allows us to achieve that behavior. It doesn't have to come out of the box, but it must at least provide us the ability to implement that ourselves then. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Besides that, do we have like a minimal list of requirements that the editor should provide out of the box?
So I think that's pretty much what we need to define. And I think maybe let me actually just revisit my comment here. I think this is when the marketing growth team went through their exercise of determining what CMSs and static site generators they want to evaluate. They broke it up into a must-have, should-have, nice-to-have from a feature list point of view. And then they created a score for each of these tools that they evaluated. And that helped them whittle it down to kind of like a few that they want to do proof of concepts with. So I think essentially what we probably want to do is against this evaluation criteria, specify it as must have, should have, nice to have kind of thing. Because ultimately what we really want, is to evaluate something against these criteria. And we want to know, like to your point, what is the minimum? So, does it meet all the must-haves kind of thing? And so I think that's what we can use to define our minimum criteria. And that would probably be a step after this. So I think let's go in and, for instance, an obvious UX thing is a block-based editor, or let's call it block-based editing. And I think we've defined that properly here. Let me just okay, we didn't define it. One of editor.js has a piece of copy I can just steal it to. Block style editors. Right. What does it mean? Here we go. An editor that consists of separate blocks. Okay, that sounds more or less what we want. So block-based editing. So content consists out of separate blocks, paragraphs, and each of them is an independent element in the editor. Just wrap this text here as well. Okay, evaluation criteria. I think this is one of those that whatever we use, this could be expensive to have to create ourselves kind of thing. So this feels like it's one of those must-have criteria, but I don't know necessarily how to put that as an evaluation criteria. Maybe the criteria is simply comes with block block-based editing approach.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
a great criteria.
Yeah, comes with a block. Or let's just say comes with, has a block-based editing approach. That's the criteria, and I think we're very much kind of like clear on a requirement of that. We've made it. This is the direction we want to go in, and I think that's the right thing to pursue. I think this, for instance, front matter editing is one that I wouldn't specify as a must-have, because what it does feel like is, like we're pretty much creating a front matter editing experience separate from the editor. We're essentially not we're telling the editor, don't worry about front matter. We'll handle it in our application, kind of thing.
That's right.
So
I think that what we really need is this is more related with the extensibility part of the tool. Like
yeah,
what we really need to do is like being capable of removing and hiding that from matter, and just manage it. Having the capability of managing it wherever we want.
okay, but I don't think then we need to specify it as a UX requirement at all. No.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just quickly have a look at our other stuff here. So this was one of our old ones. Now, based on the direction we're going in, I don't think that editing the raw markdown or being able to switch between WYSIWYG mode and raw markdown mode, or having a preview of markdown, a live preview, is a requirement anymore. Do you agree with that?
I agree.
That's yeah.
And I think that.
Sorry, guys.
And I think that what we can do, even though first, I don't think that users will be entering the raw markdown mode in a mobile device, right? That's very unlikely. So we can always display Monaco in the raw version.
Yep. So markdown shortcuts. So the ability to type markdown syntax in the WYSIWYG editor and have it automatically convert it. So this I know is it is a power user feature, but it's definitely one that we want to facilitate, because if we don't do this, we run the risk of alienating the more engineering-minded team members, for instance, at GitLab, who are familiar with Markdown, write it every day, and it's almost like second, it's muscle memory they have, writing Markdown, and instead of moving their mouse to go and click a toolbar icon, they'll want to just type, and so I think that's an important one. So this again is one that it doesn't have to come out of the box, but it must allow the ability to transform content. I want to, on the fly is probably not a nice word.
I guess that it should transform text into a form. That's difficult to define.
Yeah, it's essentially what you want is you want it to be able to you want to be able to have sufficient event interception or handling if it doesn't come out of the box with this to have it. You want to be able to identify the text and this actually has to be on key like a key event almost, because if I'm typing like if I'm just showing you, if I'm typing that, like I want it, as soon as I space, I want that converted to the presentation of that. So you must allow the ability to, I guess, to listen for input. So I guess the first one is provides the functionality as standard, and then, but if it does, with option to extend, or must allow the ability to listen for input and transform input into presentation format. I mean, does it make sense what I'm saying there?
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so that's a big behavior definition that we need. Okay, so we're almost on the hour. I have a hard stop at 4 o'clock because I have an item on the front end agenda that I need to verbalize. So let's quickly see how far we can get. Visual styling and management of tables. Right, this I think is a good one to put down. So I'm going to call it visual table editing.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is one of my favorite features of editor Toast UI is the table editor. So the ability to, but now that's a very specific feature. Now I'm wondering, like if you look at any editor with a toolbar, like it speaks to providing functionality, but now, do we really have to call out tables specifically? Are we getting a bit too specific here?
What is a more generic term for this feature?
What I'm thinking of it more is it's, like for instance, say the GitLab comment thing. Like if you add a comment, you can start a table like that. But what you can't do is you can't manage the table. You can't say add a new row or add a new column kind of thing. So I think it's that second level or second step of interaction with and customizing it. So for instance, in Toast UI, let me quickly go to our static site editor and show what I mean. So if I edit this page, so I go in here, I insert a table, but then when I'm here, I can add a column, I can add a row. So I can still, I can customize the syntax through, I guess, feature specific controls. And that could count for, say for instance, I had an image that was added in there. Oh God. Like for instance here, if I right click here and it says, and I click on properties, for instance, maybe it comes up with a dialog that allows me to set the width and the height of the image. So it's like once the syntax has been added, allowing me to customize it in a user-friendly way. So
yeah,
it's essentially
to allow to extend the WYSIWYG tool, the WYSIWYG editor. You want to have the ability to extend or to build custom WYSIWYG editing tools or custom content.
Yes. So feature editing, let's call it, the ability to add or extend custom. It's so difficult to put this in a succinct way.
I think that we are mixing technical requirements with a UX one, because I think that's part of the accessibility.
That is, you're right. I'm always thinking like it's going a step too far to define, table editing. I think what I'm really just talking about is the ability to continue work. Like for instance, right now, we don't even know that they're heading, but I feel like which heading this is. So it doesn't show. So I feel like it's like once the syntax is being rendered, is to continue editing that element, that block, it's block customization. That's essentially, it's not like you add a block and then you can't modify it. So it's more block modifications, I guess. So the ability to edit. Does that make sense more?
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. I guess another way of defining it is the ability to provide WYSIWYG tool for existing content, right? That is just like, it's not limited to adding new content, but also to edit it.
So yes, so it's WYSIWYG interface to interact with existing elements. Is that the way we want to phrase it? All right. Okay, we're on the hour. We're going to stop the call. Enrique, I think we've got a good structure going here. I think what we should do is we should continue just fleshing this out. I will take the action to keep fleshing out the UX ones, and then async we can carry on and we can review it. And I think our next steps on here is to then, I'll break these down into individual rows for the evaluation criteria. And then what we should do is we should put must have, nice to have, or maybe even because all of these are, essentially are must-have categories, but we overall, but we want to, at the kind of like, to be able to score things, we probably want to indicate what of these are, like, for instance, no jQuery, is a must-have because our code base is moving away from jQuery. We don't want to reintroduce that. If it's vanilla JavaScript is okay. If it's Vue.js, it's nicer, kind of thing. But let's take it one step at a time. I'm going to take the action to flesh out the UX requirements further, and then we can async collaborate on this further until we have it buttoned down.
Sounds good. Thank you,
Cool.
Jean.
Thanks for your time, Enrique. Cheers.